Welcome to Dalma Makes. In this video, I will share how I made a miniature leather-bound book with a secret hidden inside. This project is partially inspired by a really interesting object you can find in Baldur's Gate 3 called the Curious Book. I just wanted to make my own version. I had this really cool miniature resin bottle, and I thought it would be really cool if I could hide it in a hollowed out book. I want to make a somewhat realistic book at a small scale. So I'm going to start out by figuring out the measurements for the pages of my book, as they need to be large enough to accommodate my tiny bottle. For the pages, I used this already kind of yellow cream colored paper. I think it's better than stark white printer paper, as it's going to be easier to fabricate the illusion of old weathered paper. I don't remember exactly how many pieces of paper I cut out, but I took each one and folded it in half to prepare them to be bound together into a text block. I just try to carefully align the edges and make a nice crisp fold. I want to create a proper text block for this mini book. To do that, I counted the number of double pages I had, and I divided them into an even number and basically stacked 4 of them together to create signatures. At this scale, making signatures bigger than this wasn't really working, as the material of the paper was causing some bulging. The next step is to mark the signatures on the spine so I can pierce them all in the same spot to make it easier to sew them together. I just used my pokey tool to punch some holes through the layers of paper and repeated it for every one. To sew the signatures together, I used one strand of embroidery floss that I doubled up, and I did a simplified bookbinding stitch method. I have done a little bit of bookbinding from scratch, but I am no expert, and this is a little bit improvised and a little bit messy, as working at this scale is quite different from binding a full-sized book. So I'm not showing the method in depth. If you're interested in learning bookbinding, there's a lot of tutorials on YouTube, and you can search for the kettle stitch method for the one that I'm using here. After I got all the signatures joined together, I went back and forth a couple of times to reinforce some of the stitches. This does not look very neat right now, but it's going to be hidden. I don't mind as long as it's functional and the pages will be held together nicely. To further distress the pages and make them look a bit more old, I used a brown ink pad on the edges. Before I go any further, I realized I should do the hollowing out. To do that, I marked a small rectangle that's going to fit my bottle. I want it to be a fairly snug fit so that there won't be a chance for it to fall out accidentally. And with the sharp blade, I just meticulously cut through layer by layer through a good 2/3 of the book, I would say. I wanted the hollowed out part to sort of be in one piece, so I decided to glue them together with some PVA glue. I didn't completely press the pages together. I actually encouraged the pages having some variety and the edges not lining up perfectly, as I think this makes it look a bit more interesting, like the book itself has been well used before. I was just testing out to see if the bottle fits, and it's an affirmative. I'm going to make the cover from scratch too, and for that I'm going to cut out 3 rectangles from a thicker cardstock. I'm going to make the cover slightly larger than the text block, and I tried my best to be as precise as I could with my measurements at this point, as functionality is dependent on that. As I went along, I made adjustments. I realized the spine piece was too wide, so I marked and cut that down appropriately. And now it fits nicely. For the actual cover, I wanted to use some real leather. I had this beautiful scrap of red colored leather, and I just found a portion of it that had no creases and marked and cut out that bit. Of course, I'm going to save the rest of the scrap for a different project on a different day. To attach the text block to the cover, I needed some Endpapers, and I chose a scrap of pattern paper that was in perfectly matching colors. I also inked those edges to make the core of the white paper disappear and make it fit more with the theme of my book. I used a glue stick to attach paper to paper, and I used PVA glue to attach the cover pieces to the leather. I allowed this to fully dry before continuing, as I wanted that permanent bond. When dry, I realized that due to the thickness of the cardstock, it wasn't closing quite properly. Normally at a larger scale, such a small margin would have no effect, but when we work with miniatures, every millimeter counts. So I just shaved down some of the material from the parts where the leather was hinging, and this allowed for a full range of motion. At this point, I used a very dark red alcohol marker to color those cardstock pieces, just in case any of it will be showing in the final project. It would probably be a lot more difficult to tackle this after the book is assembled. Normally with leather bounding, the edges would be folded over the cardstock, but the leather at this scale once again would add way too much bulk. So instead I trimmed it very neatly along the edges and trusted my materials and especially the PVA glue to prevent any peeling or fraying. And of course I neatened up the fresh cuts with more of that matching alcohol marker. Now with a nice neat leather bound cover, I can unite the text block. I'm going to apply more PVA glue to those end papers I added earlier, and I'm going to try my best to attach them as neatly as possible. After it's fully dried, I'm quite happy with what I have so far. And to hold it together temporarily, I just used a hair tie, as I want to adorn the cover of the book. I don't want to do too much. I just want to use this round metal tag and a tiny little watch part to fill in the hole in the tag. I'm going to use a portion of a sticker on top of that metal tag that's of a flowering plant. The sticker has a complete clear background and it has some gold foiling. I made sure to burnish it on really well, and I cut off the edges neatly and even made sure to sand those edges a little bit for a very neat finish. I also remade the hole in the material of the sticker so that tiny watch part would have a room to settle in. Because this is metal and very sleek, I used a cyanoacrylate as an adhesive. This will definitely be permanent. Here I'll show you a close-up of that adornment. I used the plant motif because I'm going to make this into a handmade botanical book. I titled it Medicinal and Useful Plants, a Field Guide. And I'm going to fill in the pages one by one with little rough sketches of plants and handwritten notes, as if the owner of this book has been taking notes and writing down everything they discovered about all the plants that they have encountered in their journeys that have been useful or interesting. I didn't put too much detail into these pages. They're not exactly legible, but I thought it would be worth having the effort of the pages being filled in by hand. An alternative would have been creating these pages digitally and printing them off, or printing off some additional images to glue to the pages. But I think for my tiny book, the fully handwritten and hand-drawn pages work just fine. On some pages I drew the leaves of the plants, on others the whole plant or just the thorny stem, sometimes a cross section of a certain part of the plant. I truly love those real-life botanical books with the beautifully hand-drawn images. I imagine that kind of work must have been really satisfying. When I arrived at the hollowed out section, I continued to fill in the page as normal, as if the hollowing occurred after the book was filled in. At this point, I thought, if this hollowed out page is constantly being used by having that bottle taken in and out, it would definitely be the most used and dirtied up. So I colored it a bit with some brown paint, and I added some additional inking to the rest of my now filled in pages as well. I'm showing you a bit of a close-up of the pages. What do you think about this approach? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Once again, the tiny bottle fits perfectly and snugly, but I want my book to remain closed when not in use, and I obviously can't use the hair tie for that. So I found some leather straps, and I picked out a piece that was of appropriate length and made sure I could comfortably tie it around the book. To make the leather strap look a bit more interesting, I also colored its edges with the same alcohol marker I used on the inside of the covers, so that it matches and looks a bit more interesting. I think this is an appropriate closure system for a hefty little tome like this. I just tied a looser double knot, and with that, my miniature book is finished. This was a fun exercise in miniature bookbinding. I've definitely learned a lot. I would possibly use more stitches if I were to repeat a similar project, and maybe hollow out the book before assembly, as that was rather tedious. But there we have it, a miniature book with a secret compartment. Let me know what you think about this project in the comments below. I would love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to press the like button and consider subscribing to my channel. I upload a new crafty video every week. Thank you for watching. I hope you're having a nice day. Bye.